So, of course, much of this concern in society right now is over this national security law that will soon come down from Beijing. Can you say, matter-of-factly and without reservation, that this is good for Hong Kong? There are a lot of people who are very concerned.
Well, I can say categorically it's going to be very good for Hong Kong. National security is fundamental to any state, any sovereign state. And so I think, therefore, by enacting national security legislations is going to bring about stability in Hong Kong. And bringing about stability in Hong Kong, it's going to create, insofar as business is concerned, predictability and prosperity. So I think it's going to be something that Hong Kong will need and will benefit from.
Now, many people in Carrie Lam's administration, including yourself, have been appealing to the people of Hong Kong to trust us, that it is going to be good for Hong Kong. However, there are not a lot of details, which has led to much speculation onto what will be in this security law and whether it will supersede local laws drafted by the Legislative Council as prescribed under the Basic Law. How can you convince the people that it's going to be okay if you yourself do not have the details from Beijing yet?
Well, I guess, yes, you're quite right. We don't have the details yet. But then we have the National People's Congress decision. And if you look at the decision, they lay down three fundamental points that are very relevant to the question that you've raised. It states, and I'm not trying to recite it, but it states in gist that in safeguarding national security, the one country, two systems is to be enhanced, Hong Kong's stability and prosperity is to be preserved, and the legitimate rights of the people in Hong Kong is going to be safeguarded. So I think those are actually in the decision which the National People's Congress have passed. And of course, when the Standing Committee of the NPC is going to do their legislation, they'll have to observe these three fundamental principles that as Hong Kong people we are all very concerned with.
Will Hong Kong people get the adequate chance to debate this meaningfully, or will it simply be imposed?
Well, I wouldn't be able to say, because the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress, the NPCSC, if I call it in short, have their own legislation laws, I think in China that's called, that they will have to comply with in order to deal with the enactment exercise. And of course, when the national security law is to be put into the Annex 3 of the Basic Law under Article 18, the Basic Law Committee and the Hong Kong government will be consulted. And so at that stage, we'll do the best we can to convey the concerns, which I'm sure we mustn't assume that they haven't heard from the media, the concerns and the requests of the people. So I'm sure that they're well aware of it. But of course, the government will continue to do just that.
Why did we have to go through all this turmoil over the last year with the initial extradition bill, which was absolutely reviled by millions of people here? Let's not, mince words there. When Beijing and the Standing Committee and the National People's Congress Standing Committee could simply add this bill to Article 3 of Article 18, as you just suggested. They could have avoided this if this was going to be the end goal anyway.
Well, one has to make a very important distinction. When we talk about national security, like any other countries in the world, national security is within the purview of the central authorities. Yes. And therefore, within the purview of the central authorities, then, of course, the central authorities can, as it is now doing, provide for legislations and other policy matters. So that's quite different from what you were just discussing. But let me just finish. Why do we need it? Because exactly of what has happened in particular in the last 6 months of 2019. And of course, also the social unrest and a lot of people actually chanting slogans of independence, etc. And of course, there is also the problem that Hong Kong has faced in the past 23 years, that we're not able to, for one reason or another, pass any legislation that would safeguard national security in any shape or form. So I think as the central authorities, they see the need to provide for that, of course, in the light of the circumstances that are prevailing in Hong Kong.
So frustration boiled over, I guess, because Article 23 is what you're talking about, as the local legislation which is required by law for Legislative Council to pass that. It was scrapped back in 2003 when 500,000 people turned up and protested against this. And then there's the extradition bill as well, which was pretty much tabled as well because of the unrest. So why is it then we're hearing from not only the deputy head of the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office, as well as Hong Kong's lone delegate on the NPC Standing Committee in the last couple of days saying extraditions will be or could be allowed under special circumstances? Is that your understanding? And what is a special circumstance under mainland law?
Right. Okay. Now, first of all, I have to separate a number of points that you've bundled together, with respect. I don't want to obfuscate the issues. Article 23 of the Basic Law, of course, provides us with a constitutional duty to legislate to safeguard national security. The rendition arrangements, the Fugitive Offenders Ordinance amendment that was promulgated or that was proposed to be promulgated last year was something that originated from Hong Kong entirely as a matter of the case. So we've gone through that and we're not going into that. So those are two quite separate matters. Then you talk about the third thing, which is what about the situation relating to what has just been said by the Hong Kong, Macau and Affairs Office, Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office. Insofar as that is concerned, of course, at the moment we do not see any specific legislation as to how that's to be done. It would be a little bit difficult to speculate as to what might or might not be the special circumstances that give rise. But again, I think the important thing is that the autonomy of Hong Kong is still going to be exactly preserved as it is now, because we still have free flow of capital, separate customs territory, we control the currency, Hong Kong dollar, etc. So far as business is concerned, it is not going to be affected. But in fact, with the national security legislation, it's going to bring about stability and therefore predictability, which I think business is most concerned with. And I think that's the way I would like to say or talk about it.
What are you hearing, though, about the issue of whether it's going to be retrospective or not? There have been protests for the last year, oftentimes violent. Thousands have been arrested. Their fate potentially could hang in the balance under this new law.
Well, again, two matters that you put together. I think one should separate that. First of all, let me deal with those who were arrested last year in relation to the offences that are going to be charged or not charged, as the case may be, because some of them are still under review by our Department for prosecutorial decisions. So those are under the current law that will be done, etc. You then mentioned the retrospectivity point. Insofar as that is concerned, we don't know. Commenting on rumours or commenting on speculation is meaningless. However, Hong Kong, of course, has a very important principle that we often mention, that there is no retrospectivity in the light of Bill of Rights, Article 12, with some exception when it's treaty or customary international law. That sort of concept is not unique to Hong Kong. It is more or less universal. In mainland China, they have exactly the same sort of principle. Criminal law, there is no retrospectivity, subject to the exceptions, etc. I mean, the exceptions are exactly the same. Now, how that's going to turn out, we will have to wait and see. But the principles are the same.
Now, as Justice Secretary here, what would you most push back on? What would you like to push back on?
How do you mean?
Push back against some of the fears that we're hearing and that could be in this national security law. What are you standing up for the Hong Kong people and their rights?
Well, insofar as that is concerned, I am definitely standing up for the rule of law in Hong Kong. It is very important that a Hong Kong person committing a crime here, arrested here, should be gone through the prosecutorial process with the Department of Justice taking the control under the Basic Law and, of course, before our judiciary in Hong Kong, which, again, the independence is very much preserved in the Basic Law, and, of course, we will do everything we can to uphold that.
Now, the Hong Kong Law Society as well as the Hong Kong Bar Association have voiced their obvious concerns that the new law must conform to existing Hong Kong legal structure. But I've seen, either it was in a blog post or recent comments from you, you said that is impractical and unreasonable to expect it to apply to everything in the new law. Why is it unreasonable?
I'm so pleased you asked that question, because I think the reactions on the media have been quote-unquote misplaced and out of context. If you read the whole of my blog, I was pointing out that, of course, there are two systems, the civil law systems and the common law systems. When it comes to terminology, you mentioned the word retrospectivity, how we described it in Hong Kong, maybe described slightly differently. The terminology of life imprisonment, for example, could be in different terminology in Hong Kong. So those terminology, of course, will be different. So to expect, I think it arose because there was a call that everything should be in exactly the same way as the common law system would expect. To me, that is a little bit difficult to completely comply with, because after all, this law is enacted and drafted by the National People's Congress Standing Committee and the relevant legislative drafters. So when they're drafting it, they could have different styles. But the important thing, which I think both in Hong Kong and in the mainland we would be looking to, is that the laws have to be clear so people know when they're overstepping the limits, and the courts and our department will know when and how to apply the law in making prosecutorial decisions and in making adjudications before the court.
You also said that there was no need for a sunset clause, which would basically mean you could do away with the national security law if Article 23 of the Basic Law was eventually passed. So you're saying that these two laws could and will presumably be in lockstep together? Right,
okay. Again, a little bit conflating the two matters.
Okay.
What I think I understood from the article that was written was that there ought to be a sunset clause for what will be in Annex 3, which is the national security law, to be out of action, if I call it that. Mm-hmm. And what I'm trying to highlight is this, and I wrote it in 2 points, and I'm trying to recap it. First of all, insofar as Annex 3 is concerned, there is already in Article 18 how Annex 3 legislation is to be added and taken out. So there is no need for anything to be done, because the NPCSC can always consult the Basic Law Committee and the Hong Kong government and then decide to remove a particular legislation from Annex 3. Secondly, your suggestions of looking at whether when the Article 23 legislations in Hong Kong is done, that would be taken out, we don't know, because there are two different perspectives. One is from the national context, national perspective, and which is what the national security law from the NPCSC is looking at. And of course, as a constitutional duty, we still have to complete the Article 23 legislations, but there will more be on a domestic perspective, because after all, as an SAR, as a special administrative region, we see it not as broad as the central authorities would be when it comes to national security.
We need to wrap up, but do you expect it to be expedited? Will it happen soon, this month?
Your guess is as good as mine.
Okay, well, the NPC Standing Committee is meeting today through Saturday. Usually it takes 2 to 3 meetings of the NPC Standing Committee to promulgate this type of law. We don't know, though, yet, so it's anyone's guess. Justice Secretary Teresa Cheng, thank you very much for your time on Bloomberg Television.